as part of our continued efforts to reach the African and other ethnic communities in the United Kingdom with greater impacts and create the platform to hear your silent and unheard views in this hugely growing community in the United Kingdom, our channel, Ben TV, presents to you another live current affairs television program. Our focus on the program is to review and discuss issues around the diaspora community in the UK. The program offers you that unrestricted voice on issues affecting you in the UK. Join us live every Monday at 10 a.m. All right, thank you for joining us on the program, and the program is still Dialogue in Diaspora, coming to you live from Ben Television. You can still be part of the program. Our initial program spoke about how Brexit may affect you, the future of Britain outside Brexit. You can still be part of the program. You can call into the studio to tell us what you feel, how Brexit may affect or not affect you, positively or negatively, what you think Brexit still means for you and to you. You can still be part of that program. And I'm joined now with Awula Sewa. Awula, thank you for joining us on the program today.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
And also Kwaku, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
We'll be talking about the African identity. We'll also talk a bit of still what we had in our first segment, Brexit, and what it does mean for the African community in Britain on the show. So we'll be looking at what we are, our identity as Africans, regardless of where you live in Britain, in Africa, and in Europe, or in America. And of course, the failure of the slave masters, or the impact of slavery on the way Africans think, even in Africa, and the impact on the African culture and identity. So we'll be talking about that, Awula and Kwaku, on the show. Thank you for being part of the program.
Thank you for
Now let me start with you, Awula. I mean, you are a great campaigner. You too are a great campaigner of African being in the forefront of promoting the International Day for the people of African descent and what it does mean for Africans. Tell me, how much of the identity of an average African has been affected by the Western culture or attitude, or the culture of where we live as Africans?
Well, I think it largely depends on the person themselves. I mean, if you come from a home where Africa is portrayed in a very positive light, then even though you might be inundated with other messages, it might not have such a negative impact on you. But if all you are steeped in is the achievements of other people, and you never hear what your forefathers have achieved, it will give you some sort of inferiority complex if you think that you have not contributed anything positive to the civilization of mankind. You will feel a little less confident than others. So it can play a very important part in how you think, in your psyche. And when we look at history today, especially in the West, and sometimes even in our own countries, what we learn about, it's always the achievements of other people. When do we even learn about ourselves? For example, people talk about philosophy, or the Greeks invented philosophy. Actually, you're wrong. Philosophy came from ancient Egypt. And most of the Greek scholars that we know of, they learned at the feet of the Egyptians, who are, as we know, African people. I don't know if Kwaku wants to add anything.
I'll be interested in asking Kwaku is this. I mean, can we actually divorce the culture of where people living from them? Say, for instance, second, third generations of African living in Britain, probably not have been to any part of Africa, Ghana, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, Togo, or somewhere, and they've lived all their life in Britain, and somebody's telling them, look, you're African, even though born of African parents. It's going to sound strange to them. Can we divorce you from the culture of where you live itself?
Probably you can, but you shouldn't. And I will defer to an African proverb that says, no matter how long the crocodile is in the river, it does not become a fish. So it's incumbent on parents to instill the identity that, Joe, you may have a British passport, but you're African. It should never be forgotten. Yes, you can call yourself British, and there's no problem with that. We have multiple identities. But trying to disassociate yourself from being African, I think is an issue. And for practical reasons, you just had Brexit. One of the consequences of the Brexit was the rise in hate crime. When the fascists or the racists come down the road and they see, they look and say, oh, Joe's got a British passport, so they see an African. So you cannot be divorced from that. I'll give another anecdote. Not too far from here in 2011, there was an uprising as a consequence of the death of Mark Dugan. And there was this African, I think she was from Zimbabwe. She's risen high up in an executive position in Britain. So she's fine, she went to one of the best universities and so forth. It was only when her colleagues and her, all Europeans, she was the only African in that floor, were watching the uprising, and they said, oh, look at what your people are doing. Then they'll care to her, I have tea for you, we colleagues, but you are different, you're African. It hit home. So we don't want those things to happen. You should always be aware of who you are. You're an African, yes, and I said, say you can have multiple identities, whether African Caribbean, African British, but the African should not be denigrated.
Okay, I've got this call coming. Yinka, good morning, Yinka. Thank you for joining us on the program. Go ahead and make your point, Yinka.
Good morning, my brother. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Great.
Thank you very much for the discussion on last Friday, and I'll still stick by my promise. If you can give me 1 minute, you alleged me the upper week and some of the discussion we had, like I've just come on your board now.
Can I just ask you to... Can we stay within the limit of the discussion this morning?
All right, thank you, brother.
Great.
You see, about African identity, and I don't want to say something about Brexit. We all are being short form of what really happens to what they call the name Brexit. I don't want it, but I have interest in this African identity. And this will be another slap on our face if we cannot stand on our feet, like you have your guest in the studio. Because a lot of us, I was in London during the weekend, and I saw a lot of things. I can tell you, Tunde Alabi, that I was crying to the level of the decay of the African child that I saw in London. The way and manner they went about doing their business, it's appalling. And I'm happy, and a lot of parents that I interviewed, they said they are very scared, very afraid to train their female or their children in London. But when we are now coming up with this idea of African identity, I always have a philosophy. And I want the two of your guests to share it from me. If you know a snail in my African name, in Yoruba name, we call it Igbe. Any snail that is outside that shell is dead. That is how about African identity should be. Yes, we are living in this country. We doesn't belong with them. By the time that they are taking our culture and our heritage from us, changing us for another thing that doesn't depict of being an African. Look at the way you dress, gorgeously. And you will see an African child in the city of London exposing all our body because they live in Europe or living in London. What are we talking about? Parents should be awake. And I want these campaigners to try as much as possible not to limit the campaign right in various, maybe their own streets. They should make it public. They should make it viral. If you are training, if you are teaching, if you want us to have an African identity, please, you need to do more. Better than what BBC will be broadcasting to each individual houses. You can imagine they are saying something about famine in some African countries, and they are naming my country, Nigeria, there. BBC are saying that. They send one of the journalists to the up north to be reporting when a lot of Nigerians have enough money to buy the whole of United Kingdom. What are they talking about? But we, that we're supposed to propagate the information to the nearest of our citizens, we don't do it. We fell short of it. And that is what I am so much cried about, that if you are doing it to the best of your knowledge, that will help an African heritage, African culture, and our children to imbibe it.
All right, Yinka. Thanks a lot for joining us. Kwaku, you want to respond?
I can hear the passion in his voice, and I appreciate it. He did say quite a lot of things, so I'll pick up what I can. First of all, I think, and sorry if I'm misquoting him, but the essence of what he was saying was that they're taking away our culture. No, I don't think they're taking away. We are very complicit, and especially being here, oh, in England, this is how we do things. So it's not the system, it's us who are complicit.
But isn't that right, that this is England, this is how they do things, and we must comply? We can't. Can we really live the way we live our life in Africa in England? Is that possible?
Hold on. Even what I'm saying, it's not necessarily in Africa. There are people who are just as un-African as us. They speak English. They can't even speak their own local language. So it's not necessarily us being out of Africa. I'm saying us being here. In your home, I don't think the government comes to your home and dictates how you train your children and what education you give to them. Around here, for example, there are Saturday schools, which people send their children to because they want them to just not only know the 3 R's, but to know also the African history and culture. So you can be proactive in developing that sense of Africanness in your child. If you're so minded, it's got nothing to do with the system. The government does not stop you taking your children to Saturday schools or to bring those African books to bear on your children. The other thing Yinka was saying was that you've got to make this go viral and blah, blah, blah. Fine, I understand where it's coming from. This is Ben TV. You're getting a space for this. We can only do what we can do. We're a small organization. For example, I hope this is not being crass, but on April 22nd, we've got a program called, what's it called?
African and Proud.
African and Proud. So this Yinka knew about, he may not live in London, but we created a forum where we can talk about these things. So we can only do what we can do. So I do respect what Ben TV is doing and what other activists and African-led civil societies are doing. Most of us are not big and we're on grassroots level. And there's a need to be on the grassroots level too.
I mean, you are a mother and a woman. You know how difficult it is as a woman, as a mother, to bring up a child in this part of the world. There are things you want to do, but the law actually restricts you. How do you circumvent or play along in a way that actually enables you to do what you want to do as an African and bring up your child in the proper African way?
Well, first of all, we need to be confident and we need to know what the law allows us to do and the law does not allow us to do. Dame Jocelyn Barrow put it very beautifully when she said, it is our duty to bring up our children and give them a sense of identity. And as Brother Kwaku has said, there's nowhere where the government comes into your house and tells you that don't let your children be respectful, don't teach them about who they are, where they come from, don't give them African names. The government is not the one who forces us to give our children European names. So we need to know where we have the responsibility. When the government comes in is when it comes to disciplining. And the government has said, or the law says, do not use an implement. It doesn't say do not discipline your children. It doesn't say don't correct your children. It says whilst disciplining, do not use an implement. So we need to know what the law allows us to do. And I'm very confident that there's nothing presently preventing us from bringing up our children to be productive and responsible citizens and proud Africans. Because for me, certain things are fundamental. And I know I might be seeming to be going on too much. Names are very important. We have beautiful African names. Why do we insist on giving our children European names?
Talking about names, there have been several reports, including polls, showing more people get first-time interview appointment with English name. I mean, you see that several polls have actually shown that when people interchange their names with British English name against somebody with the African or otherwise names, they get first-time interview.
Well, I mean,
quicker and better. So that's institutional, isn't that? And so if people adapt and adopt,
well,
can I stay on Awula then?
Well, I mean, I'll say that I don't accept that. I'll say that even on the continent, where the people who give the
you
job,
don't accept.
well, I'll accept that that may well happen, but I'm saying that that's not the whole story. And I want to rewind and go back to the continent of Africa. We are the ones who sit on the panels. We are the ones who give jobs. You go to the continent of Africa, go to Ghana, and almost across the board, very few people have only African names. They'll say that this is my Christian name, equating Christian name with European name. If I'm called Georgina, Georgina isn't a biblical name. So what I'm trying to say is that even on the continent where that doesn't happen, we have gone into the mode of we have to have European names, and those are the ones that we call our first name. Coming back to Europe, or coming back to the UK where we find ourselves, as part of the program, I'll be having a whole list of Africans who are extremely successful. I mean, you have yourself. I see that you have, you are successful. You have somebody like Kwame Kwei-Armah. You have Frema, what's the last name? The actress.
Frimpong.
No, it's not Frimpong. But anyway, it's gone out of my mind. But we have a whole list of Africans who are very successful. Thank you very much. You have the one at, I don't know why the names have gone out, but they have only African names, and they're doing very well. Thank you very much. Adebayo, what's his full name?
Dotun
Adebayo. You have so many of them. So yes, there's this pull, but there's also the other side of the coin. In any case, if you are a proud African, you don't compromise. You don't change it just because. If you do as well as you should do, you go on in excellence. Let's see what happens. But if we begin to use that as an excuse to just use European names, then we've lost the battle, haven't we?
Kwaku, isn't that real? I mean, you're struggling to cope with life, and then for a change, you pull Yales, Gabriel, Greentree, and then
I hear you. I hear you.
Do what you need to do to get on the ladder.
Okay, I hear you, but in the world, there's this notion of courses for horses. I am not going to go that route. And you notice that I only use Kwaku because I was giving out the names that were not African, and I made the point. Kwaku, when you're communicating with me, before you've even seen me, you know I'm an African. That's important because I don't like my time to be wasted. Right? I used to be in the media, where I still am, where I wanted people to know that I'm African for a start. So if you've got an issue, don't waste my time. So the horses for courses, yeah, there are some people who make a decision to use the European name as the first name, or even not use the African name if they do have. But it reminds me of today. In fact, this Saturday is the UN International Day for Remembrance of Slavery, right? The victims of slavery. And it occurred to me that we're marking these things, but how could slavery have ended if some Africans had not said, look, I'm sorry, I have to do something about our state. So if we're going to be complacent and say, oh, it's been empirically proven that if you've got an African name, you are probably facing an uphill task to get the job. So I'm going to use the European name, then nothing will change. Now, in fact, I'm writing an article just looking at actors, British actors. Most of the successful African British actors are Africans with African names, and that's why I'm going at. So what I'm trying to say, even the media, where it's supposed to be Hollywood and blah, 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 you can make it sometimes with your African name. So we cannot just say, oh, it's easy to use European name, let's just go. Then that cycle will never be broken. It needs to be broken. But as I said, horses for courses. I'm not a fascist. I'm not dictating for Africans to continue using their European names. And as Olaseo said, they're not Christian names. I'm a Christian, but Georgina, George, and all these names are not Christian. They are European. Let's be mindful of that. Lastly, I was in Ghana last year, and what surprised me, I didn't notice. So I was looking at the papers and the media. Most people will have the European name first, and if they've got an African name, second. So it's like we're denigrating our own. And that's, she said, in Ghana, the idea is that you're expected to be Ghanaian. So do you need a European name before you can move forward? I think not. So it's the colonization. In fact, there's a movement about decolonizing. It's not just in the academia. It should be everywhere. And it's to do with the mind, first of all. Can I just end with Kwame Nkrumah? You know of Kwame Nkrumah? Mm-hmm. Do you know he had a European name? But he consciously made a decision to drop the European name, and everybody knows him as Kwame Nkrumah. She mentioned someone called Kwame Kwei-Armah. If you're not aware of him, you assume that he was Ghanaian because those are typical Ghanaian names. But Kwame Kwei-Armah was born Ian Roberts. He's from the Caribbean. He's a successful actor, and is now the director in, I think, Baltimore, theater in Baltimore. So we can make it with African names.
So some of the reasons people have chosen a probably simpler European name will be pronunciation, the way people say Awula, and then you go to a proper English European setting. And the way
Tunde,
I'll just
there's
say-
no
You
you don't
stop.
like it, and then
No, no,
say,
no.
you know what, just call me Georgina.
Tunde,
No,
I'll
no,
say
no.
that all
Hold
these
on,
things
hold
are
on, hold on.
excuses. They're excuses.
Does
Okay.
this stop them pronouncing those long Russian names? Does this stop pronouncing those long Sri Lankan names? No. I tell you, it's our own. And let me tell you something else. When Paul Boateng came on the scene as a politician, they used to call him Paul Boateng. But the right pronunciation is Boateng. I'm saying, why? At the same time, there was a conservative MP that came on the scene, and he had a sort of Eastern sounding name. They made the conscious decision, BBC, they've got people who teach you how to pronounce, they changed the way his name was pronounced. So it was up to Paul Boateng. I spoke to him and he didn't seem to be bothered about it. But for that conservative MP who had the Eastern sounding name, it was important that it was pronounced correctly, and the BBC and other media started pronouncing it correctly. So we can make it. In fact, we're just being too lazy and complicit. It will say, oh, it's too difficult to pronounce. I found those Russian names sometimes difficult to pronounce, but I see it being pronounced correctly. So if we don't make a change, it will still continue.
I mean, that if you take a look at children born in this country, they find. I have seen children in this country, young adults, that they wouldn't even for whatever reason want to associate with anything African. I mean, it's clear even British politicians who are of African background,
Heritage.
Ghanaian, Nigerian doing well as MP, they will not associate with anything
But why
black
do you
or
think?
African.
But why do you think that is the case? That is precisely.
Could that actually be the failure of the continent itself and its leaders?
I don't think that's the whole story. I think we have to go back to what we said about education and about Kwaku was talking about decolonizing education. And I go back to that. If the narrative, all that you hear about Africa is famine, war, disease. When it comes to Europe, you look at their beautiful edifices, you see all the beautiful things they've done. Somebody sent me a clip the other day and he talked about different people. He went on about how, I'm giving an example, the Arabs gave us numbers, these people give this, the Greeks supposedly gave us philosophy, the Italians and Spaniards, or is it Portuguese and Spaniards, discovered America as if there was nobody living there when they got there. And then, of course, there's no mention of the African, completely blanked out. So I had to tell my friend that actually this clip is obviously not telling, it's very Eurocentric. First of all, as I said previously, philosophy came from Egypt. And the last time I checked, Egypt is in Africa. And then you look at these people who supposedly discovered the New World. There were human beings living there. And what did you do to the human beings who were living there? They were massacred. There were genocides. So the majority population has then become a minority. So you don't even talk about the genocide, and nobody associates Europeans with genocide. So the point I'm making is that if you have a clip where you look at empires, you look at Ghana, Mali, Songhai, Zimbabwe, you look at Mansa Musa, you look at African achievement, then you will not start looking to Africa as the Europeans' burden.
Okay, sorry, I've got a call waiting. That's why Stanley, thank you for waiting on the other side. Good morning, Stanley. Morning, Stanley. Good morning, Stanley. Is that your European name, African name? Stanley, are you there? I think I lost Stanley. I'm sorry about that, Stanley. You might want to call back. Sorry for keeping you there. Sorry, I got to share because I actually wanted to take Stanley. She was talking about decolonization of education. I mean, I was looking at what you decolonize about African leaders themselves treating their own people in a highly inhuman manner. I mean, corruption. I mean, take a look at what is happening in South Sudan. I mean, between the president and his vice, then killing the people. Look at what is happening in Zimbabwe. For so long, old man who cannot even do anything, sitting down, not wanting to leave. The other day, it took the intervention of the world, the rest of Africa, to get Jammeh out of the Gambia. Sad, horrible stories coming from the continent. What do you decolonize about that? That's enough education to put people's minds up. No, I don't want to be part of this continent.
Okay. First of all, you got to realize that when you look at Africa, we're in a stage called neocolonialism. So you may have...
What is neocolonialism in what is happening in South Sudan? Here are the people killing themselves for power's sake.
Listen, there are a lot of actors in what is going on. So having an African leader does not necessarily mean that that person is there representing the interests of Africans. You know, in parts of Africa, Africans actually moved away so the Chinese or other people can have the land. So these things happen. The first thing a leader should do is to look at the interests of his people. So that is certainly not in the interest of his people. Now, let's come to the persons that you've mentioned. Jammeh, certainly he made the mistake. He made the mistake, and that is unforgivable. So as an African station, you're quite right to criticize him. But now let's look at Mugabe. We have to be very mindful of what we say in Zimbabwe. How did the state itself come to be? Do you know the Lancaster Agreement? That was something that was stretched out with the old Rhodesia government and Britain. A lot of things were renegated upon, and that is what Mugabe is trying to fix, like the land.
But is Mugabe the only intelligent, the only strong person in Zimbabwe that he's got to sit in power for this long?
Let me just say something. Whether you like it or not, Mugabe is an elected, so democracy works. Now people like the US tell us that, oh, you're supposed to have 2 terms. Did you know that there was no 2-term till Roosevelt? So you could go on forever. Let's look at the UK. A prime minister can be in office for 50 years if the people so elect him or her. So there's no limit. Britain is telling people that, oh, you've lived too long as a leader. But in Britain, a leader can be in power for as long. There's no limit. So this idea of 2-term or 3-term, I think the people should be able to decide what kind of democracy they want. So we shouldn't fall into the so-called way. Someone being in power for long does not necessarily make him good or better. So that's not the argument I'm making. Kagame has been in Rwanda for quite a while. I haven't been to Rwanda, but from what I hear, he's doing a good job. So it's not how long people are in there, but what they're doing for their nation. If they're not doing anything for their people, then yes, they don't need to be there.
And if I can add something, go I mean, the narrative that disturbs me is that we looked at what happened in the former Yugoslavia, what happened in the former Czechoslovakia. When the killings were going on, nobody said, look at Europeans, they're always killing each other. People just accepted that it's the situation going on in the Republic of Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia. But something happens in Africa, it goes back to the whole narrative. It's always, oh, this is how the Africans are. And I'll come back to the decade. As you know, we're in the UN decade. If I can say something, yes.
I just want to put your all on the Yugoslavia issue. I mean, it is on record today that specifically the United Nations set up the former Yugoslavia tribunal that tried all the different parties.
No, but that's not the point I'm making. Tunde, that's not the point I'm making. The point I'm making is that there was genocide there. They are Europeans. Nobody said, look at Europeans, look at what's happening in Europe. All I'm saying is that there are 55 or 54 countries in Africa. Anytime something happens in one, we want to tar everybody with the same brush. And I think that's very unhelpful. When there was the war and massacres going on in Yugoslavia, nobody said, oh, these Europeans, they are up to their ways again. Look at what they did in America, where they killed all the Native Americans. Look at what they did in Australia. They are at it again. Nobody says that. But when it comes to Africa, one idiotic leader does something and we want to tar everybody. And I think that is a very serious thing. I'll go back to the decade. We're in the UN decade for people of African descent. And and the theme, as you know, is recognition, justice, and development. One of the things the UN has recognized is the distortion of history. The UN itself in that resolution has recognized that there is this distortion of history that needs to be corrected. And it's the distortion that leads us where we are, that we don't even question the fact that anytime there's anything negative about Africa, oh, that's how Africans are. We forget that when we had the good leaders like Patrice Lumumba, do we know how Patrice Lumumba came to be killed? You know, we have to go and how somebody like Mobutu was put there. So long as he was taking the loot to Belgium and to the West, it was fine. He could do what he liked. So let's also be a bit mindful about this narrative that we go to. And let's look at each African country as it goes. And as Kwaku added, let's also forget this myth of democracy and realize that it's what's best for the people, not how long a person stays, but what he does. You don't want musical chairs, corrupt leader A comes, corrupt leader B comes, and all stay for 4 or 5 years. That doesn't help anybody. What you want is the best possible situation for the African countries concerned. I accept that a lot of our leaders are not doing a good job. That is not in dispute. But is that enough to tar the whole population because of what the leaders are doing? That's my question.
I mean, if we take a look at people fleeing the continent, Africa, going via Libya and ISIS to Italy, and you keep hearing these stories, the thing keeps going back to African leaders. Can we actually not take anything away from this? That, look, let's be fair, African leaders are not being fair to their people.
Absolutely right, and that goes back to the point I made. No, I agree with you there, 100%. And as I said, we're in a state of neocolonialism. Congo, or Democratic Republic of Congo, should be one of the richest countries in the world. But who owns the minerals? I saw a map of Africa. It was showing the minerals, cocoa here, gold here, South Africa. Who owns the gold?
Who controls
yeah.
it?
It's not the people. That is why we have an African-led government and it sanctions miners being killed for protesting. Then, in fact, your last guest was talking about last Saturday. Last Saturday, we marked the International Day for elimination of racial discrimination, or we call it the UN Anti-Racism Day. We're down at our Parliament House. Now, we have Africans who are in leadership, and nothing has changed to some extent. Oh, the point I was trying to make was that the International Day for the Elimination of Racism is 21st March, and that is predicated upon what happened in 1960 in Sharpeville, South Africa, where the apartheid government mowed down 69 innocent protesters against the past laws. But then we have an African-led government in South Africa, and they sanctioned, was it, I don't know, about 100 people, Marikana miners being killed. So yes, some of our leaders are to be brought to book. But there's a point I made, it's all about neocolonialism. Someone makes the point that a lot of, when I talk about independent states in Africa, I put it in quotes, because why are we independent from or to what? Because a lot of those independent countries are what you call paper flag independence. You just had a different flag and you had the African put into place, but nothing much has changed.
So, they've got African leader controlled, manipulated by
the Europeans.
But
can I add
world
something
systems,
as well?
yes.
What do we blame? Do we blame the Europeans or the African themselves?
I blame the
Africans are
Africans.
Yeah, the Africans are complicit. Nobody's denying that. The only point I'm making is that how does one tar a whole continent because of the behavior of people in leadership? It doesn't make sense to me. And I'll add that if you look at what's happening in Libya, there's total chaos there. There wasn't chaos there in that way when Gaddafi was there. How was Gaddafi manipulated and murdered? You have to think about that. And now we have people fleeing Libya. That wasn't the case when Gaddafi was there. We have to ask ourselves, why was Gaddafi murdered? And sometimes we don't answer those questions, or we don't even ask the questions. And I'll go back to what I've been saying, that Africa has questions to answer. We need to take responsibility, but by no means tar a whole continent because of irresponsible behavior by some of the leaders. And I'll add something here. There's a very interesting clip of Jeremy Corbyn. He's being interviewed by young people, and the young people are asking him that what the advice does he have for young people, and he said, study. The most important lesson to study in school is history, because history will teach you about our past. And he talks about Britain, how they need to be humble about the interference in the Middle East and other places. But he adds that the things we take for granted in this country, they didn't just happen. They happened because people protested, people agitated. It's not as if the Europeans are so good that they want to be good to fellow Europeans. The ruling class only wants to be good to the ruling class. But people have protested, people have agitated, and we've got changed. Maybe in Africa, we use so much energy protesting against European rule. And now that the Europeans have gone, we need to protest against the irresponsible behavior of some of our leaders and hold them accountable, get them to go, get them to know that they can't be in power and do exactly as they please. That is what we need to be doing. But we don't need to think that in Europe, all the ruling classes think about helping those who are not part of their circle. That's not true. Why is the NHS being dismantled as we speak? Because those in power don't really care about those who are on a lower income. But what people are doing is protesting, and that's why we are having change.
Kwaku, you want to add to that?
No, I think she's made a good point.
I mean, let's still stay a bit on the continent itself. You look at what is happening in South Sudan. Every day you see the killings. You feel, my God, what is happening? Power tussles between the president and the vice became ethnic violence, became religious violence. And then here was the youngest country in the world celebrated a couple of years ago. Now it's become torn, it's become something else. Because the people are power hungry. Are we going to blame the West for that as well? Kwaku, let me come to Kwaku.
Are we going to blame the West for it? I think it's a good question. I don't want to put everything at the door of the West. But what I'd like to say is that what you see is not always what it is, and that there are actors behind the scenes. But I think it's a shame about South Sudan, because nation building is not easy. Few have had a very smooth transition. So when you do business, there's this thing about norming, storming, and before you get to the normality. And that probably is going to take a while. But of course, if we have leaders who've got their heads screwed on and they're interested in the people, then we will not arrive at what is going on right now in Southern Sudan. But I would like to come to your own country, Nigeria, which at some time split and you have Biafra. Biafra could not have been if there were not interest from the West. So what I'm trying to say is that sometimes the West has invisible hands in these things. But even so, if the Africans are there as leaders, they need to be able to make some change. But it's the whole point about neocolonialism. We should not forget about that. So some would say nothing much has changed. We're still in a state of colonialism, only that we've got flag independence and African heads of states. But some people are being manipulated. But lastly, our last Sewa says this, and it's important that we realize who is the more powerful, the manipulator or the manipulated. So if we're manipulated, then we have to get our heads together to stop being manipulated.
Okay, let's come back to Britain. As Africans living in Britain, how do we keep our heads above the water? How do we get this thing around ourselves that we are Africans, no matter what, we are Africans? Look at it from this angle. If you take a look at the killings in the UK today, the youth crime, the killing, the death among the youth, 70% of them are black against black, child, youth, young adults. So how do we get around that? A black boy killing a black boy.
I mean,
in the UK.
A human being killing a human being is wrong. A European killing a European is wrong. African young people killing African young people is wrong, cannot be justified in any way. So we need to go back and ask ourselves that as a community, because we like saying that it takes a village to raise a child. So as a community, how did this happen? How do we get the young people to have a sense of pride in who they are. Because if you are a proud young man, you don't go around killing other people. What is the point of that? Somebody disrespected you, therefore you are killing them. If you talk to young people, you find out in the past, they used to have conflict. Maybe one boy will hit another boy. There was no notion of getting a knife or a gun to go and kill somebody. Human beings will always be human beings. We have the good, the bad, the ugly, whether you are African, whether you are Asian, whether you are European. The Africans don't have a monopoly on the good or the bad. We are just human beings created by one God. So maybe we need to go back to our homes. What kind of messages are we giving our young people? How do we give them a sense of responsibility so they become productive members of society? No productive member of society, whether European or African, thinks that knifing somebody is the best way out. So yes, there are things going on. There are white youths killing other white youths. So it's not just African youths killing African youth, but it's unacceptable. And I'll go back to the upbringing. How are we raising our children? Some time ago, we used to make sure that they had some religious input. Maybe that helped them to be more responsible in how they behave. I don't have the answers, but I do know that there are other people in the community, whether with Saturday schools, whether with mentoring programs, trying to get around the lack of hope that makes these young people behave the way they do, speaking to them, finding out from them why they're doing what they are doing. To me, that's the way forward.
Okay, on the last note, let me come to you, Kwaku. Your organization, Africans For You, engage in a series of programs to decolonize some of these negative imprints that is on us, i.e. distortion of history and a couple of others. Tell us one of the inspirations you get in doing this.
Well, the stuff that we do is not mass market. So it's not the stuff that you fill Wembley Arena with. So the fact that I see human beings forgo a Saturday to come to our events is inspiration enough. That means they are interested, because we don't have a big marketing spend to advertise in the newspapers and whatnot. So anytime we have an event, and I'm mindful that it's competing with other things, so what inspires me is seeing that human beings have turned up. Because our history, whether even, not necessarily even African history generally is not a popular subject in schools, for example. So if we're doing things around history and people come, that encourages me. Yes, we'd like to see more numbers, but I'm not disheartened even if few people turn out. The fact is that they are interested, so that's what inspires me. For example, as I said earlier on, April 22nd, we've got something called African and Proud with a question mark. So I'm not saying African and Proud, hey, we've got the banner. We're going to interrogate our identities through music, through a play called As Long As You're of African Heritage, and some discussions. And can I just deviate slightly? This is the 30th anniversary of the introduction of what used to be called Black History Month into the UK. We, for the last 5 years or so, have been calling it African History Month rather than Black History Month. So we are sort of launching something called African History Month UK on May 13th. Those two programs I mentioned take place at Unite the Union, which is in Holborn. So if you Google or you go to Eventbrite, you see the pages. So hopefully people will come as long as I see people in there. That inspires me to continue.
I've got, let's take the last call before we call the show off. Mr. Vincent, good morning. Thank you for joining us on the program today. Good morning.
Yeah, morning, Alavi.
Yes.
And morning, Gitch, for your co-discussants. Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
The problem, I've listened to you quite for a time now. The issue about Africa and leadership. Can you hear me?
Yes, go on.
The issue about Africa and its leadership. Now, I want to refer you to Chinese, for instance. Their leadership, the Indian leadership, Mahatma Gandhi and Chairman Mao. Now, these are two densely populated nations, so to speak. If these two people were able to organize their societies, why can't we think about what the kind of character these people are made up of? Chairman Mao and Gandhi. all of them trained in the UK. Now you come to South Africa. The Dutch people occupied the place, humiliated, put the blacks or the Aborigines behind the scene. And now, after handover, what happened? Look at Zuma. Zuma acquiring the whole world there. He hasn't thought about the Europeans who were there before him, even Nelson Mandela. And then the one that came after Nelson Mandela. I don't think those Mandela and the next that followed him acquired as much wealth as Zuma is doing now, currently. So the issue about Africans, I think, must start with the so-called leaders, and you mentioned Mugabe. I don't think Mugabe has wealth as any other leader in Africa. That is why they have a belief in him. So what we are thinking about in Africa is, if you want to be a leader, now, excuse me, now in Nigeria, for instance, we're talking about Magu and Abacha. And the Buhari is there talking about corruption. Now, if you want to clean a society, we want to see you cleaning society, especially when you are content with what you have.